I'm Kennedy, 33, female. I live in a small, quiet town where the seasons change with gentle predictability, a stark contrast to the seismic shift that recently tore my professional life apart. For 25 years, I was the head cartographer at GeoSync, a company I helped build from the ground up, map by meticulous map. I poured my life into its digital archives, creating systems and proprietary methods that became the bedrock of our success. Then a new president arrived, and with a single bloodless phrase, she rendered my entire career obsolete. This is the story of how my quiet, dedicated service was terminated for the sake of fresh perspectives, and how the very foundation I built became the instrument of my reply. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. 25 years is a long time. It's long enough to see technology evolve from bulky, whirring machines in refrigerated rooms to sleek tablets that can hold the entire world. I was there for all of it. I started at GeoSync when I was just out of college, a bright-eyed idealist who loved the poetry of maps. The founder, Arthur Sterling, was a man of the old school. He believed in craftsmanship, in knowledge passed down through mentorship, and in loyalty. He saw something in my quiet dedication and took me under his wing. Back then, we made physical maps, huge, beautiful, intricate things that required steady hands and an artist's eye. But Arthur was no fool. He saw the digital revolution coming. Together, we transitioned the company. While he handled the business, I handled the data. I was the architect of our digital migration. It wasn't just about scanning old maps, it was about creating a new language, a new way of seeing the world through layers of data. I built the Sterling Archive, a proprietary database system named after the founder. It was my life's work. The Sterling Archive wasn't just a storage system. It was a complex, multi-layered geo-relational database that I coded from scratch in the early 2000s, using a patchwork of programming languages that are now all but extinct. It was the central nervous system of GeoSync. It housed all our historical data, our client projects, and most importantly, the unique analytical algorithms I developed that gave us our competitive edge. The modern, user-friendly software the rest of the company used was merely a pretty face. A shell that sat on top of my archaic, labyrinthine, but flawlessly functional core. No one else understood it. Why would they? It worked perfectly, humming away in the background, a silent, reliable engine. New hires were trained on the modern software, and the underlying architecture was my domain alone. It wasn't a secret, just a fact. I was the keeper of the keys, the one who performed the delicate maintenance and updates in the quiet hours when the servers were least active. In my personnel file, my role was listed as head cartographer, a title that was both an honor and a colossal understatement. I was the company's institutional memory, its digital ghost. David Chen, our senior JAWS analyst, was one of the few who had a glimpse of the system's true nature. He'd been with the company for 20 years and had seen me work my magic countless times. Kennedy, he'd say, shaking his head after I'd solved a seemingly impossible day. It's a corruption issue. I swear this whole place is held together with your digital duct tape. We'd share a knowing smile. He respected the complexity, even if he didn't know its full extent. He was a good man, a loyal friend, and one of the last vestiges of the company's old guard. Life was stable. I earned a good salary, owned my small house, and found satisfaction in my work. I was respected, if not fully understood. When Arthur Sterling retired 5 years ago, he sold the company to a larger tech conglomerate. He made sure our contracts were secure, our jobs protected. For a while, things stayed the same. The new corporate owners were distant, content to let their profitable little mapping company run itself, but then they decided it was time for a change. They wanted to synergize and modernize. They sent us a new president. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins arrived like a thunderstorm on a clear day. She was 42, impeccably dressed, with a smile that was all teeth and a vocabulary lifted straight from a corporate buzzword dictionary. She spoke of disruption, agile frameworks, and blue sky thinking. To her, GeoSync wasn't a legacy of craftsmanship, it was a legacy system, in need of an overhaul. She saw our quiet efficiency not as a strength, but as stagnation. In her first all-hands meeting, she stood before us, a PowerPoint presentation glowing behind her. "We need to inject some new energy into this company," she announced, her voice ringing with false enthusiasm. "We need fresh perspectives to take us to the next level. I remember catching David's eye across the room. He gave a subtle roll of his eyes. We had heard this kind of talk before, but there was a sharpness to Sarah's delivery that felt different, more menacing. She started with cosmetic changes. The office got a facelift with gray paint and motivational posters. We were forced into team building, exercises that involved building marshmallow towers and sharing our brand identity. It was annoying, but harmless. The real changes began to roll out a few months later. She brought in consultants, young MBA graduates who walked the halls with clipboards, analyzing workflows and human resource allocation. They never spoke to me for more than 5 minutes. They'd ask about my role. I'd say head cartographer. They'd nod, make a note, and move on. They saw the title, not the function. They saw an old name on an org chart, a relic. The call came on a Tuesday. It was an invitation to a meeting with Sarah and the new head of HR. No context, no agenda. Just a discussion about your future with GeoSync. I knew exactly what that meant. I'd been in the corporate world long enough to recognize the clinical chill of a pre-execution summons. I walked into Sarah's glass-walled office and took a seat. The HR person offered a weak practice smile. Sarah, however, didn't bother with pleasantries. Kennedy, she began, folding her hands on her pristine desk. As you know, we are restructuring to better position GeoSync for the future. We're looking to bring in fresh perspectives, new skills, and a more dynamic approach to our work. I just stared at her, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had given my entire adult life to this place. I had built its digital heart, unfortunately. She continued, that means we've had to make some difficult decisions. Your role as head cartographer has been made redundant. We feel a new, younger team with more modern skill sets will be better suited to our forward-facing strategy. The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. Younger team, modern skill sets. She was firing the architect of the entire system for not being modern enough. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I see, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. After 25 years of service. Yes, Sarah said, her tone unwavering, and we appreciate your service. That's why we've put together a generous severance package for you. We'll also be bringing in a new junior cartographer to take over your day-to-day responsibilities. A junior cartographer to replace me, the sheer, unadulterated ignorance of it was stunning. They thought my job was just clicking buttons on the software. They had no idea what lay beneath. They had no idea that the day-to-day responsibilities were a tiny fraction of what I did to keep the company running. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. What was the point? She had made her decision based on a spreadsheet, not on reality. I listened numbly as they explained the terms of my severance. I would be escorted from the building immediately. My access was already revoked. It was a swift, brutal, and utterly impersonal corporate execution. As the security guard walked me to my desk to pack my personal belongings, a few photos, a favorite mug, a small glow, I saw her. Emily White, a young woman barely 26 with a bright, nervous smile, being introduced by Sarah as the new mapping lead. She was my replacement, and she had absolutely no idea what she was walking into. The first week was a blur of shock and humiliation. I spent it in a daze, cleaning my house, tending to my garden, doing anything to avoid thinking about the gaping hole that had been torn in my life. The severance package was indeed generous, a hollow admission of my long tenure. It was enough to keep me afloat for a year, maybe more, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the erasure. 25 years of my life, my knowledge, my creation, dismissed in a 10-minute meeting. David called me every day. He was furious. They're fools, Kennedy. Absolute, unmitigated fools. He fumed. They think the system just runs itself. They think that pretty interface is the whole company. They'll figure it out. I said, my voice flat. Or they won't. Emily asked me where the primary data repository is. He told me on the third day. I showed her the server room. She just stared at the old rack that hosts the Sterling archive and asked if it was some kind of backup system. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time all week. What did you tell her? I told her to ask her boss. He said grimly, this isn't my mess to clean up. By the second week, the shock began to recede, replaced by a slow, burning anger. I started thinking about the Sterling archive, my creation, my baby. Sarah and her team of MBA Wonderkinds had no idea it even existed as a discrete, handmade entity. They saw it as a line item on an IT inventory, a server rack with a quaint name. They didn't know that it required manual maintenance. Specifically, it required a complex series of commands, a sort of digital key. to be run at the end of every fiscal quarter to properly archive the period's data and reindex the historical records. Without this process, the system would still function for day-to-day tasks, but its performance would start to degrade. Search queries would slow, data retrieval would become sluggish, and eventually, corruption errors would begin to cascade through the newer layers of software that sat atop it. The process wasn't documented anywhere. Why would it be? For 25 years, I was the documentation. It was a complex ritual I performed every 3 months, a silent, solitary task that was as much a part of my job as breathing. It was my secret handshake with the machine I had built, and the end of the fiscal quarter was just 3 weeks away. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. They had fired the only person who knew how to perform the engine's vital maintenance. They had terminated me, the systems architect, and handed the keys to a novice who thought the engine was a backup generator. They hadn't just made a mistake, they had lit the fuse on a time bomb of their own making. My anger began to morph into something else, something colder, clearer, a sense of opportunity. Sarah Jenkins wanted fresh perspectives. She was about to get one. She had dismissed my legacy, my knowledge, my history. But that history was not just in my head, it was embedded in the very code that ran her company. It was an echo in the archives, and it was about to get very, very loud. The next few weeks were a strange sort of limbo. I started looking for new work, polishing my resume, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind was back at GeoSync, counting down the days to the end of the quarter. I was a ghost, haunting my own past, waiting for the consequences of my absence to manifest. David was my unwilling spy. He'd call me, his voice a mixture of frustration and dark amusement. "Emily is a nice kid," he said one afternoon. "She's smart, a fast learner, but she's trying to fix a Swiss watch with a hammer. She keeps talking about migrating everything to the cloud, a project that would take years, everything to the cloud, a project that would take years and a team of specialists. She has no concept of the beast she's sitting on." He told me about the small glitches that were starting to appear. A major client's historical data took 20 minutes to load instead of 20 seconds. A complex layering query for a municipal project returned a timeout error. Emily and the new IT team, a group of outsourced technicians who barely knew the company's name, blamed it on network latency and server load. They were looking in all the wrong places. They were checking the plumbing while the foundations were cracking. Sarah held a meeting about system optimization. David recounted, barely suppressing a laugh. She wants to leverage synergy to streamline our data access. She used a lot of buzzwords that all amounted to the same thing. She has no clue what's actually happening. The day of the quarterly rollover came and went. I imagined the servers at GeoSync humming along, blissfully unaware that their digital housekeeper was gone. The data from the last 3 months was now sitting in a temporary partition, unarchived, unindexed. The degradation would now accelerate. It wouldn't be a sudden crash, but a slow, agonizing decay. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. A week later, David called me. The amusement was gone from his voice. "It's starting, Kennedy. The system is becoming unstable. We lost a whole data set for the new logistics contract. It just vanished. Emily and the IT guys were up all night trying to restore it from the backups, but the backups are corrupted too. They don't understand that the backup system is slave to the primary archive. The corruption is replicating. How's Sarah handling it?" I asked, my voice calm. "She's in a panic," David said. "But she's trying not to show it. She keeps talking about teething issues with the new operational paradigm. She's blaming the old infrastructure. She told a client it was because of our outdated legacy systems. The irony was delicious. She was blaming my system for the problems caused by her ignorance of it. That was the moment I knew I had them. They weren't just incompetent, they were arrogant. They had thrown me out, believing I was a relic, a fossil from a bygone era. They failed to understand that the past is not always something you can simply discard. Sometimes the past is the foundation you are standing on. I spent the next few days preparing. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in employment and intellectual property. I explained the situation in hypothetical terms. He was fascinated. The proprietary system, built on company time, belonged to the company. However, the undocumented knowledge required to maintain it. That was mine. I had no obligation to provide it. Firing me without a proper knowledge transfer was not my failure. It was theirs. It was, as he put it, a case of catastrophic managerial negligence. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee anymore. I was a strategic asset they had willingly discarded. The dots were all connected. The picture they formed was one of beautiful, poetic, and entirely justifiable revenge. The final piece of my plan fell into place 2 weeks after the end of the quarter. David called me in a state of controlled panic. "Kennedy, it's bad. The core search index is failing. We can't access any project files from before 2010. It's like a decade of our company's history has been wiped. Clients are screaming. Sarah is in back-to-back crisis meetings. And Emily." I asked in tears. He said quietly, "She knows she's in over her head. It's not her fault. They threw her into an impossible situation." I felt a brief pang of sympathy for the young woman, but it passed. She was a casualty of Sarah's war, not mine. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The system wasn't just glitching now, it was failing. I had built the Sterling archive like a stone archway. Each piece of data, each algorithm, was a carefully placed stone. The quarterly maintenance process was the keystone. By firing me, they had removed the keystone, and now the entire structure was beginning to crumble. My plan was simple. I wouldn't go to them. I would wait for them to come to me. And when they did, I would not be the supplicant ex-employee. I would be a consultant, an independent contractor with a very specific and very expensive set of skills. I drew up a contract with my lawyer's help. It was a work of art. It outlined the services I would provide. Emergency diagnostic and restoration of the proprietary Sterling archive system. It specified my fee, a one-time consulting fee, that was exactly 5 times my generous severance package. And it stipulated my hourly rate for any ongoing maintenance, which was set at a number that would make a corporate lawyer's eyes water. But the most important clause was this: the contract was for a limited term of 3 months. It was a temporary fix, not a permanent solution. I would stabilize the system, document the quarterly maintenance process, and train a successor of my choosing, my choice, not theirs, and that choice would be David Chen. He had the experience and the institutional knowledge to understand the system's philosophy, and I knew he would protect its integrity. The final condition was non-negotiable. Sarah Jenkins was to have no oversight on this project. My point of contact would be a board member from the parent company. I would not report to the woman who fired me. I saved the document to my desktop and waited. I knew it wouldn't be long. They were bleeding money and client trust with every passing hour. Their fresh perspectives had led them to a dead end. They had tried the new way, the modern way, the buzzword way. Now they would have to come crawling back to the old way. They would have to come back to me. The call came on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't Sarah. It was her assistant, her voice tight with stress. "MS Jenkins would like to schedule a meeting with you as soon as possible." "I'm afraid I'm no longer an employee of GeoSync," I replied politely. "If MS Jenkins wishes to procure my services, she can contact my lawyer. I'm sure he'd be happy to discuss my consulting rates." I gave her my lawyer's number and hung up. The next call, 2 hours later, was from a vice president at the parent company. He sounded tired and angry. "MS Vance," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we seem to have a problem." "So I've heard," I said. He explained the situation, as if I didn't know every excruciating detail. He talked about unforeseen data integrity issues and critical system failures. He finally got to the point. "Sarah Jenkins tells us you are the only one with the technical expertise to solve this." "She is correct," I said simply. "We need you to come in." "I can do that," I replied. "My lawyer will be sending you my standard consulting agreement. Once it is signed and the initial fee is wired to my account, I can be there on Monday morning." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. He was calculating the cost of my fee against the cost of his company's slow, spectacular implosion. It wasn't a difficult calculation. "Send it," he said, and the line went dead. I walked into the GeoSync office that Monday morning, and it felt like walking into a war room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. People who used to greet me with a nod now stared at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I walked past Sarah's glass office. She was on the phone, her face pale, her usual composure completely gone. She saw me, and for a fleeting second, her eyes held a look of pure, undiluted hatred. I gave her a small, serene smile and kept walking. My contract stipulated that I be given my old office back. It had been cleared out for me. I sat down at my old desk, powered up the terminal, and accessed the system with the master credentials they had been forced to reinstate. The digital decay was worse than I had imagined. It was a beautiful catastrophe. I spent the first day just running diagnostics, assessing the full extent of the damage. David brought me coffee, a huge grin on his face. "Welcome back, boss," he whispered. "Just for a little while, David," I said, "and get ready. You're going to be learning a few things. By the end of the week, I had stabilized the system. I restored the lost data from a deep-level backup I had hidden on an offline server, a personal insurance policy I had maintained for years. I ran the quarterly maintenance protocol, and the system breathed a collective sigh of relief. The gears started turning again, the queries ran at light speed, the archive was whole, the parent company VP flew in to meet with me. He was a pragmatist. "You've saved us," he said. "The board is impressed." I was just doing my job, I said. A job I was told I was no longer qualified for. He had the grace to look uncomfortable about that. Sarah Jenkins has been reassigned, effective immediately. The board felt there was a significant failure of management oversight. Reassigned. The corporate euphemism for being fired and hidden away in a do-nothing job until your contract runs out. She hadn't been terminated for fresh perspectives. She had been terminated for a catastrophic lack of perspective. My 3 months as a consultant at GeoSync were the most lucrative of my career. I worked with David every day, meticulously documenting every line of code, every process, every quirk of the Sterling archive. I translated my 25 years of institutional knowledge into a series of manuals and protocols. I was, in effect, building a map to my own mind, leaving a legacy that could no longer be erased by a single, ignorant manager. David absorbed it all. He was the perfect student, understanding not just the how but the why of the system. By the end of my contract, he was more than capable of taking over. The company offered him my old position with a significant raise. He deserved it. On my last day, Arthur Sterling, the founder, came to see me. He was in his late 70s, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He had heard what had happened. He sat in my office, looking at the company he had built, now saved from the brink. "I always knew you were the smartest person in this company, Kennedy," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'm sorry they forgot that. They were reminded." I said with a smile, "That they were." He chuckled. "So, what's next for you? I hear you're a very wealthy woman now." "I'm thinking of starting my own consulting firm," I told him, "specializing in legacy data systems. Turns out there are a lot of companies out there with foundations nobody understands anymore." He nodded, a proud, fatherly look on his face. "They'd be lucky to have you. You don't just build systems, my dear. You build things that last." I left GeoSync for the second and final time, but this time it was on my own terms. I left behind a stable company, a capable successor, and a lesson that I hoped the corporate world would take to heart, though I doubted it would. I never saw Sarah Jenkins again. Her name became a cautionary tale at GeoSync, a whisper in the hallways about the president who tried to modernize the company by firing the one person holding it together. I did start my own company. And it's thriving because the world is full of brilliant, arrogant people who believe you can simply discard the past. They forget that the new is always built on the old. They fire the architects, erase the history, and then act surprised when the whole building starts to shake. My job is to remind them. My job is to show them the map of where they came from and charge them a handsome fee for the privilege. It's a good business, and I have to say, revenge is a very profitable perspective.